Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're going to bridge this massive 2,000-year gap between ancient Rome and the cultural pressures you and I face right this very minute. We're diving into Revelation chapter 2. Now, I know that might sound like dusty ancient history, but I promise you, the stakes literally could not be higher. We're about to see how ancient survival tactics apply directly to our modern lives.
Think about this for a second. Have you ever felt like the world is demanding that you hand over your brain, your integrity, or your spiritual spine in exchange for just a little temporary social comfort? Well, if you feel that modern pressure, you're actually experiencing the exact same struggle as first-century Christians. It's the exact same battle, just a completely different century.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1. Welcome to the first century, the glittery empire.
You see, long before John of Patmos was standard reading in Sunday school, his visions were circulated as a set of urgent, high-stakes warning letters. And these were sent to 7 tiny, embattled Christian communities scattered all across Asia Minor. Now, these weren't sleepy suburban congregations, right? They were these tiny islands of believers completely surrounded by a massive, aggressive, and incredibly glittery Roman Empire that demanded absolute total conformity. To survive in this empire, you had to navigate a cultural landscape where civic pride, pagan religion, and corporate trade were so thoroughly wrapped around each other that just buying your groceries or joining a local workers' union could actually mean endorsing idol worship. The Romans, well, they were polytheists. They absolutely loved options. They really didn't mind if you added Jesus to your personal list of favorite deities, but they were utterly terrified of anyone claiming Jesus was the exclusive king. That claim right there was a massive cultural threat.
Which brings us to Section 2, Burnout versus the Crucible, featuring Ephesus and Smyrna.
So, how did these early communities actually react to this intense pressure? Well, looking at them brilliantly illustrates the ultimate dilemma faced by literally any generation of believers. On side A, we have Ephesus. They were top-tier rule followers in this glittering metropolis, but they were essentially dying of spiritual burnout and icy perfectionism. Then on side B, we've got the church at Smyrna. They were facing a literal crucible. Rejecting emperor worship there meant instant financial bankruptcy or, death in the local arena. So you have cold, cynical routine on one side and the very real threat of life or death physical persecution on the other.
Now, the message to Smyrna was simply to hold the line, zero reproof there. But look at this quote directed at Ephesus. "I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love." The Ephesian saints, they had fantastic doctrinal boundary maintenance. They called out the phonies and they worked until they dropped. But they had a fatal flaw. They turned their faith into a cold mechanical checklist. It's like they had all the precision of a high-tech machine, but absolutely none of the fire.
Moving on to Section 3, the danger of fitting in, focusing on Pergamum and Thyatira. So here, the stakes shift from external violence to sneaky internal compromise. This is all about the subtle, seductive danger of just fitting in. Take Pergamum, for instance. It was dominated by this massive, throne-like altar to Zeus built on a nearby hill. In fact, the text literally describes it as the place where Satan's seat is. The cultural dominance of paganism here was just overwhelming. Living there was quite literally like trying to keep a campfire lit in the middle of a hurricane. The temptation to just blend in, to just stop fighting the cultural winds, it was incredibly powerful.
And that temptation gave rise to a very specific group. In both Pergamum and Thyatira, the Nicolaitans were gaining some serious traction. They basically taught that believers could freely engage in pagan trade feasts and immoral social customs without harming their salvation at all. According to the early Christian writer Irenaeus, they were essentially saying, hey, why make life hard? Let's just play along with the culture on weekdays and we'll worship Jesus on Sunday. It was, without a doubt, the ultimate form of spiritual fence-sitting.
But Revelation pulls absolutely no punches when addressing this kind of double life. The text calls this following the doctrine of Balaam, which is a reference to ancient Israel being enticed to trip up by blending in with their pagan neighbors. Over in Thyatira, a prophetess nicknamed Jezebel was preaching the exact same message of compromise. The absolutely crucial takeaway from the text here is that trying to blend the kingdom of God with the values of Babylon doesn't make a believer adaptable. According to John, it makes them spiritually useless. All right, Section 4, Ancient Symbols, Modern Revelation, and the Payoff for Overcoming.
So, what does this all mean? If you don't compromise, what exactly is the payoff? Well, the rewards promised to those who overcome aren't just your generic clouds and harps. They are deeply, deeply symbolic. As you'll see, our source text maps these esoteric ancient symbols directly to specific Latter-day Saint theological meanings. Hidden manna represents unseen spiritual nourishment. The white stone represents a Urim and Thummim, and a new name represents personal divine identity. Let's break these down a bit. First up, the hidden manna. In ancient Jewish tradition, the miraculous manna that fed Israel in the wilderness didn't just vanish. A portion of it was actually believed to be preserved in the heavenly sanctuary for the righteous at the end of days. The really powerful concept here is that while the world around you feeds on fleeting, empty cultural validation, God promises a secret, internal source of spiritual strength, nourishment that the world simply cannot see, understand, or touch.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how modern revelation approaches these ancient symbols with such high specificity. This quote from Joseph Smith in Doctrine and Covenants, section 130, offers a breathtaking theological explanation. It describes the white stone actually becoming a Urim and Thummim, bringing knowledge of a higher order of kingdoms, and containing a new name that acts as a keyword. I mean, this is early Latter-day Saint temple symbolism hiding in plain sight right there in the New Testament.
And building on that, the early apostle Orson Pratt taught that these divine gifts reflect the ultimate destiny of humanity. In this framework, the white stone represents a personal channel of divine light and revelation. The new name, well, that marks a transformational shift in identity. It's a sacred covenant token sealing a personal relationship with God. The whole shebang is entirely tied to the concept of eternal progression, growing to receive all that the Father has.
Let's bring this home. Section 5. Applying Revelation 2 today. Upgrading the user interface.
You know, it's incredibly easy to look back at ancient Ephesus or Pergamum and think, well, their problems were completely alien to ours. I mean, we don't have literal temples to Artemis on every street corner, right? But the underlying pressures, they haven't fundamentally changed one bit from ancient Rome. They've literally just upgraded their user interface. So to survive this modern interface, the source text provides a structured, three-step action plan to apply those first-century survival tactics to the 21st century. Step 1, identify your first love. Step 2, spot the modern Nicolaitans. And Step 3, seek the hidden manna. Let's see what doing this actually looks like in practice.
So here is how the text suggests putting that into action. First, it requires evaluating our motivations so we avoid serving or attending meetings out of sheer cold habit. We absolutely can't let our faith cool down into a mechanical routine like Ephesus did. Second, it means spotting modern Nicolaitans by rejecting those subtle everyday pressures that encourage believers to compromise their standards. You know, trying to keep one foot in the gospel and one foot in the world. And third, it advises seeking the hidden manna. We've got to stop trading the endless search for validation, like looking at social media metrics or public approval, for a silent, deeply personal connection with God.
Ultimately, the messages to these ancient churches remind us that standing out from the crowd has always been exhausting. And yeah, it's always been a little scary, but the promises, they are vastly bigger than anything the world can offer. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought based on those ancient promises. Will you choose the fleeting validation of the culture, or will you hold the line for an eternal identity that no cultural shift can ever take away? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this gives you a powerful new perspective on holding your ground today.